Well, Whiskey Live is a worldwide franchise that happens in over 10 cities around the world. There's 4 cities in Asia, Tokyo, Shanghai, Taipei, and Singapore. This will be the 3rd edition in Singapore this year, and it'll be happening at the St. Regis Hotel in Singapore.
And exactly how do you get inspired, that caused you to start out this new franchise?
Well, this company is, we're actually a French company, so we're based in Paris, and we've been doing Whiskey Live in Paris. I think this September was the 7th edition, so it was only natural for us to then do it in Singapore as well.
And what caused you to make this decision to take a step to organize these events?
Well, I mean, we're a company that's been around for quite some time, since 1956, and we understand that although there are very savvy whiskey enthusiasts out there, that education is key to getting the message across, and that if people know more about what they're enjoying, they actually get a lot more out of it. So it's all part of kind of a grand scheme to educate people to what makes good whiskey and good spirits beyond that.
Could you tell us a little bit of history? How did you fall in love with whiskey yourself?
I don't know how I felt. I just tasted it and liked it. I'm a wine guy originally, so I'm a sommelier. Worked for some pretty fancy restaurants in France, and I worked in New York for a little while for a wine and spirits distributor, and I think that was the first time where I really got into whiskey and single malt whiskey specifically, because we had a portfolio of really good spirits, of which a few great single malt Scotch brands.
And in which year was that?
This was in 2005. So yeah, and then moved back to France, did a few things still on the restaurant side of things, and then met up with the owner of this company, and we shared kind of a very strong passion for. I mean, it goes beyond whiskey. It's any good drink or wine or spirit or beer or whatever. Anything enjoyable, we're happy to taste and talk about.
Jeremy, tell us the difference about the variations of whiskey. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions between whiskeys from Europe and the United States.
Absolutely. The most simple definition of whiskey is that it's an aged grain spirit. So working backwards, a spirit means that it is distilled, so it's not like a beer or a wine that's simply fermented. Distillation is a process where you take something with a low concentration of alcohol and basically separate the alcohol in the water to make it stronger. So it's a spirit. It's made from grains. It can be made from any type of grain: barley, wheat, rye, corn, you name it. And it's aged, meaning that it has to be laid down to rest for at least 2 or 3 years, depending on the country, in oak casks. So there are a lot of variations depending on where it's produced in the U.S., in Scotland, in Japan, in Australia, what have you. But that's the most simple definition of what a whiskey is. It's an aged grain spirit. So unlike vodka is a grain spirit. It can also be made from potatoes, but most of the time it's a grain spirit, but it's unaged, whereas whiskey is aged.
And another question many of my fans ask is that how does Europe define whiskey compared to American whiskey?
European law defines it as exactly what I just told you: aged grain spirit. Scotland is a little specific within that landscape, where they have different categories. So the most basic category being a blended whiskey, which, as I just said, is just an aged grain spirit. It can be made from any type of grain, from any number of distilleries, and blended together. Then you have what's called blended malt whiskey, which is made exclusively from malt or malted barley, but from any number of distilleries. And then you have single malt whiskey, which is the top 7% of the production of Scotland, which is made exclusively from malted barley from one single distillery.
Speaking about barrels,
Yep.
that makes the whiskey the character. Is there a difference between the American barrels and the European barrels? Because they say that
Huge difference.
because they say that the European barrels that make the whiskey usually use aged barrels, very old aged barrels.
Yes, reused barrels, absolutely.
And American barrels different.
I mean, the first very basic difference is that American oak and European oak is not exactly the same tree. They're two different breeds of oak. American oak actually grows a lot faster than European oak, so it's thicker grained, and the result in the ending product is that you'll get a lot more vanillin, which is the aromatic compound of vanilla, also exists in the tannins of oak. You'll get a lot more of that flavor profile in any spirit that's aged in American oak, whereas European oak is tighter grained. Usually the aging process is slower compared to American oak, and you get a different flavor profile. So that's the basic thing. Also, usually when distilleries use American oak barrels, there are barrels that they have bought from bourbon distilleries. So they're reusing bourbon distilleries. When distilleries use European oak, as far as Scotch whiskey is concerned, it can be casks that were used for aging sherry, or port, or red wine, or any of these things. Mostly wines.
And tell us, this coming Whiskey Live Singapore 2012, what can our viewers and fans expect?
Well, it's like we mentioned already. It's the third edition, so there are some things that we know work and that people enjoy that we're going to continue. So obviously, tasting at the booths with the brands is definitely a repeat. The master classes are also something that we've been doing since the beginning. We're going to have more slots for master classes this year. There's 6 total, whereas last year there were 4. And then there's a few other experiences that we're adding on this year. So first of all, we have some brand experiences where brands can build their own booths and create their own experience. Then we're going to have the cheese and whiskey experience, which should be great. The pastry and whiskey tasting, the blind tasting experience, and other things that were here before but that we're doing again this year are 2 pop-up bars, a pop-up shop where people can basically anything that you taste at the event you can buy to take home at a pretty significant discount.
And who will be the who's of the whiskey industry?
Well, there's a lot more personalities coming this year from the brands. Probably the most famous is Colin Scott, who's the master distiller of Chivas, who's coming here for the first time at Whiskey Live Singapore. Then we have some brand ambassadors, some master distillers, et cetera, from several different brands. A lot more personalities this year. There's a special page on the Whiskey Live website where we're going to list all the people who are coming with their profiles and photos and whatnot.
And what's the website?
The website is very simple, whiskylive.sg, so WHISKYLIVE.sg.